Did classic television hide more pain than it ever showed? Behind the bright sets, perfect families, and cheerful laughter, some stars were losing their money, careers, health, freedom, and the people they loved. A few made terrible choices. Others were crushed by fame, illness, or unfair circumstances. Today, we count down 35 sitcom stars whose public success hit a devastating private collapse, and the final story may completely change how you see Hollywood fame. Before we enter the stories, classic Hollywood would rather forget. Subscribe to the channel. Number 35. Michael Richards. For almost a decade, audiences knew him as Kramer, the wild-haired neighbor who could make people laugh simply by entering a room. That unforgettable character turned Michael Richards into one of the biggest comedy stars of the 1990s. Even after Seinfeld ended, Kramer remained loved around the world. Then one night changed everything. During a stand-up performance in 2006, Richards responded angrily to audience members who were interrupting his act. Instead of controlling the situation, he shouted deeply offensive racial language. A recording reached the public, and the reaction was immediate. Richards apologized, including during an appearance with Jerry Seinfeld, but the damage could not be erased. The comedian who had once caused laughter wherever he appeared became associated with one disturbing moment. Major opportunities disappeared, public appearances became rare, and he largely withdrew from entertainment. Years later, Richards admitted that shame and regret kept him away. He had not lost all his money, but he had lost the public affection that once seemed permanent. Number 34. Roseanne Barr. At the height of her power, very few television performers had more control than Roseanne Barr. Her original sitcom had changed American television by showing a working-class family struggling with bills, jobs, marriage, and everyday frustration. Decades later, its revival became one of television's biggest surprise successes, but success vanished with one social media post. In May 2018, Barr published a message widely condemned as racist. ABC canceled Roseanne within hours, even though the revived program was earning enormous ratings. Her talent agency dropped her, reruns were removed, and colleagues publicly separated themselves from her comments. The supporting cast eventually returned in the Connors, but Barr's character was written out. The television family she had created continued without her. Barr argued that her words had been misunderstood and later expressed regret, but the professional consequences remained. After building a second television comeback few stars ever receive, she watched it collapse almost instantly. It became one of the clearest examples of how decades of success can be overwhelmed by a single reckless decision. If you enjoy factual stories behind television's polished image, subscribe now. Your support helps us uncover the real history hiding behind the laughter. Number 33. Bill Cosby. For generations, his television character represented wisdom, stability, and family values. The Cosby Show became a cultural phenomenon, making Bill Cosby one of the richest and most influential entertainers in America. That image eventually collapsed under numerous allegations of sexual misconduct. Cosby was convicted in Pennsylvania in 2018, although that conviction was overturned in 2021, because the state's highest court found that an earlier prosecutorial agreement had violated his due process rights. The ruling did not declare that the underlying accusations were false. Civil cases continued. In March 2026, a California jury found Cosby liable in a civil case brought by Donna Motzinger and awarded substantial damages. His lawyer announced plans to appeal. Whatever the final outcomes of continuing legal disputes, Cosby's entertainment legacy has been permanently transformed. Programs once celebrated as wholesome family viewing were removed from many schedules. Honors were withdrawn, and former admirers struggled to separate the performer from the allegations and court findings. He retained wealth and legal resources, but the trusted public identity that had taken decades to build was shattered. Number 32. Max Wright. Behind the cheerful living room set, tension was reportedly building. Max Wright played Willie Tanner, the exhausted father trying to hide a sarcastic alien inside his suburban home. Alf became a major success, but producing the program was difficult, slow, and technically demanding. The puppet required trapdoors, complicated camera positions, and long pauses between scenes. Wright reportedly became frustrated that a mechanical character received most of the attention while the human cast waited through exhausting production days. When the series ended, he left the set quickly and tried to move beyond Willie Tanner. Yet the role remained the part audiences remembered. More serious difficulties followed. Wright was diagnosed with lymphoma in the mid-1990s. He continued performing in smaller television and theater roles, but later attracted unwanted attention through arrests and reports about his private life. The performer, who had once led one of television's strangest families, gradually disappeared from mainstream entertainment. He died in 2019 after another battle with lymphoma. Wright's story was not a simple financial collapse. He lost control of his public image, saw his career narrow around a character he did not fully enjoy, and eventually lost his health as well. Number 31. Dawn Wells. For viewers of Gilligan's Island, Mary Ann Summers represented warmth, patience, and uncomplicated goodness. Dawn Wells carried that image for the rest of her life, appearing at fan events and treating the program's loyal audience with genuine affection. But being famous did not guarantee financial security. Unlike stars who receive enormous modern syndication payments, Wells said the original cast did not become rich from decades of reruns. After the financial crisis of 2008, she experienced serious economic difficulties. Medical expenses, penalties, and tax obligations reportedly left her facing nearly $200,000 in debt. A friend later organized an online fundraiser. Fans contributed more than the original goal, but Wells said the experience had been emotionally difficult. The woman, remembered as television's cheerful island sweetheart, had reached a point where strangers were helping her cover basic financial and medical needs. She continued engaging with fans, and never allowed hardship to erase Mary Ann's optimism. Wells died in December 2020, from complications related to COVID-19. Her story revealed an uncomfortable truth. Endless television reruns can make a character immortal while leaving the performer financially vulnerable. Number 30. Michelle Thomas. Everything appeared to be moving in the right direction. Michelle Thomas had played Justine Phillips on The Cosby Show before winning an even more memorable role as Myra Monkhouse on Family Matters. Myra's determined love for Steve Urkel made her one of the program's most recognizable recurring characters. Away from the cameras, Thomas was quietly facing an aggressive illness. In 1997, doctors diagnosed her with a rare form of cancer. She underwent surgery and continued trying to work. At the time, many viewers had no idea how serious her condition had become. Her career was still expanding. She had joined the soap opera The Young and the Restless, and seemed ready to move beyond supporting sitcom roles. Instead, worsening health forced her to step back. Thomas died in December 1998. She was only 30. There was no scandal, careless decision, or financial mistake behind her loss. The tragedy came from how suddenly possibility disappeared. A young actress who had spent years building momentum lost her future, just as the industry was beginning to recognize what she could do. For Family Matters fans, Myra remained energetic and endlessly hopeful. The contrast with Thomas's private struggle made her early death especially painful. Number 29. Merlin Santana. A promising transition from child performer to adult star was already happening. Merlin Santana had appeared in The Cosby Show, Moesha, and other programs before becoming Romeo Santana on The Steve Harvey Show. Romeo was confident, fashionable, and always ready with a clever comment. The part introduced Santana to a larger audience and suggested that leading roles could follow. That future ended in November 2002. While sitting in a parked car in Los Angeles, Santana was attacked and killed. He was only 26. Another person in the vehicle survived, and arrests and convictions later followed. The sudden loss shocked his colleagues. Steve Harvey publicly remembered Santana as a talented young performer who had been developing into a responsible professional. Fans who had watched him grow up on television struggled to understand how quickly his life had ended. Unlike stars who gradually watched their money or popularity disappear, Santana lost everything in a single evening. There was no opportunity for a comeback, no later interview explaining what had happened, and no chance to show how far his talent might have carried him. His final television image remained Romeo, a young man certain that the best part of life was still ahead. Number 28. Barbara Colby. After years of smaller roles, a major opportunity had finally arrived. Barbara Colby had impressed viewers during a guest appearance on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Her sharp delivery and confident presence caught the attention of producers, who later hired her as a regular on the spin-off Phyllis. It should have been the beginning of a new chapter. Colby completed only 3 episodes. In July 1975, she and fellow actor James Kiernan were walking to their car after an acting class in California when they were attacked. Colby died before she could explain what had happened. Kiernan initially survived long enough to provide limited information, but also died. The case remained unsolved. Producers were forced to recast her role, and viewers who discovered Phyllis later might never have known how close Colby had come to television stardom. Her death was particularly haunting Because she had already endured the uncertain years every working actor faces. She had completed the auditions, accepted small parts, and finally earned a place in a major network comedy. 3 episodes were all that remained of the future she had worked so long to reach. Number 27. Andrew Koenig. To millions of young viewers, Richard Boner Stabone was simply Mike Seaver's funny and slightly confused best friend on Growing Pains. Andrew Koenig brought warmth to the recurring character, turning what could have been a silly nickname into someone audiences genuinely liked. His interests later moved beyond sitcom acting. Koenig worked behind the camera, performed in independent projects, and became involved in social and political causes. Privately, however, he struggled with depression. In February 2010, Koenig traveled to Vancouver, a city he had loved. When family and friends could no longer contact him, a search began. His father, actor Walter Koenig, later confirmed that Andrew had died by suicide. He was 41. The announcement transformed how many fans remembered his television work. A character associated with harmless teenage laughter had been played by a man carrying pain that viewers could never see. His family used the moment to urge people experiencing depression not to remain isolated. Koenig's story became a reminder that humor is not proof of happiness, and a familiar face on television may be fighting a private battle far removed from the character audiences believe they know. Number 26. Paul Lynde. Every raised eyebrow and sarcastic answer made the audience laugh. Paul Lynde could steal an entire scene on Bewitched and became the most memorable personality on Hollywood squares, even though he was not technically seated in the center square every time. Comedy brought him money and recognition, but it also trapped him inside a carefully managed public identity. During an era when openly gay performers faced severe career consequences, Lynde avoided publicly discussing his sexuality. His humor often allowed audiences to understand what television executives refused to say directly. Behind the jokes, alcohol created serious problems. Reports of public incidents, arrests, arguments, and difficult behavior damaged his professional relationships. He could be hilarious one moment and unpredictable the next. By the beginning of the 1980s, Lynde had reportedly stopped drinking and appeared ready for a healthier period. But in January 1982, he was found dead at his home from a heart attack. He was 55. Lynde had not lost all his money or fame. What he lost was the possibility of living openly during his most successful years. Television celebrated the parts of his personality it could turn into a joke while expecting the rest to remain hidden. Number 25. Dustin Diamond. When a character becomes famous before the actor becomes an adult, escaping that character can be almost impossible. Dustin Diamond discovered this through Screech, the awkward but loyal student from Saved by the Bell. Screech made Diamond recognizable around the world, yet it also limited how producers saw him. While several co-stars moved into presenting, drama, directing, or other mainstream opportunities, Diamond struggled to separate himself from the schoolboy role. Financial problems soon became public. He filed for bankruptcy in 2001. Several years later, he sold t-shirts while asking fans to help prevent his Wisconsin home from entering foreclosure. The campaign generated attention, but much of it came with ridicule. Desperate to remain visible, Diamond participated in reality programs and released a controversial book containing claims about his former colleagues. He later said parts of the book had been exaggerated or written by someone else. Instead of rebuilding relationships, it created greater distance between him and the cast. Legal trouble followed after a bar confrontation in 2014. Diamond was convicted on lesser charges and served time in jail. Near the end of his life, there were signs that he wanted peace. He expressed regret about past decisions and appeared interested in reconnecting with former cast members. In early 2021, doctors diagnosed him with advanced lung cancer. He died only weeks later, at 44. Diamond's story was not simply about losing money. He lost control of his name. To the public, he remained Screech, even when he wanted desperately to become somebody else. Number 24. Jamie Foxworth. One season she was standing with the Winslow family. Soon afterwards, the program behaved as though she had never existed. Jaime Foxworth played Judy Winslow, the youngest daughter on Family Matters. As Steve Urkel became increasingly popular, stories began focusing more heavily on him. Other characters received less attention, and Judy disappeared after the 4th season without an explanation. For a child performer, the rejection was devastating. Foxworth later described struggling with the feeling that she had been discarded. Acting offers became scarce, and financial security disappeared. Although some reports claimed she formally declared bankruptcy, Foxworth later said she had not. What was clear was that her family experienced severe financial difficulty. As a young adult, she entered the adult entertainment industry under another name. She later explained that money and limited opportunities influenced the decision. Substance use and depression followed, making it harder to escape the direction her life had taken. Her story could have ended there, but Foxworth eventually began rebuilding. She participated in reality television, discussed her experiences publicly, became a mother, and worked towards sobriety. The most troubling part of her journey was how quietly the entertainment industry moved on. A child had helped establish a successful sitcom, yet the program did not even give her character a goodbye. Foxworth did not literally lose everything forever. She lost childhood stability, professional identity, money, and trust in an industry that had once treated her like part of a family. Her later recovery became proof that a performer's life does not have to end when television stops writing lines for them. Number 23. Lisa Robin Kelly. At first, Lori Foreman seemed almost impossible to defeat. On that 70s show, she was manipulative, confident, and usually several steps ahead of her brother Eric. Lisa Robin Kelly played the role with the perfect mixture of charm and cruelty. Behind the performance, her life was becoming unstable. Kelly's appearances became less consistent, and she temporarily left the program. When asked about the period years later, she said she had experienced a pregnancy loss and began drinking heavily. She eventually returned, but the comeback did not last. Producers replaced her with another actress during the final years of the series. Without the program, Kelly struggled to regain professional stability. Arrests and reports involving alcohol and domestic disputes began replacing acting credits in news coverage. Each incident made another comeback less likely. In August 2013, Kelly entered a treatment facility in California. Only days later, she died at 43. Authorities later attributed her death to multiple drug intoxication. Her journey remains painful, because talent was never the missing ingredient. Kelly had already proved that she could command a scene in one of the era's most successful comedies. What disappeared was the stability required to continue. Fans often discuss how Lori suddenly changed faces on television. The real story was not a simple casting decision. It was the visible sign of an actress losing control of her health, career, and future, while the fictional Foreman family continued without her. Number 22. Jeff Conaway. Long before reality television exposed his private struggles, audiences knew Jeff Conaway as a symbol of confidence. He played Kenickie in Grease and Bobby Wheeler in Taxi, two roles that should have secured a long and comfortable career. Physical pain became one of the forces that pulled him in another direction. Conaway dealt with injuries and reportedly became dependent on prescription pain medication. Cocaine and alcohol also became part of a long pattern of substance use. On Taxi, his behavior grew unreliable, and his role was reduced before he eventually left the program. The career never fully recovered. Conaway continued acting, including a memorable science fiction role on Babylon 5, but the leading opportunities of his younger years faded. Health problems and addiction repeatedly interrupted his work. Years later, his appearance on Celebrity Rehab with Dr. Drew shocked viewers. The confident young actor from Grease now appeared physically weak and emotionally exhausted. Some viewers saw the program as an attempt to help. Others believed it turned personal suffering into entertainment. In May 2011, Conaway was found unconscious and taken to hospital. He developed pneumonia and sepsis, and doctors said years of substance use had weakened his condition. Life support was eventually withdrawn, and he died at 60. Conaway had possessed talent, fame, appearance, and opportunity. None of them protected him from chronic pain or dependency. His story also exposes an uncomfortable question about Hollywood. When a famous person is clearly unwell, is the industry helping them, or simply finding one last program that can profit from their collapse? Number 21. Mabel King. Audiences heard power in her voice before they understood how much pain she would eventually endure. Mabel King played the formidable Mabel Thomas on What's Happening, and brought the same authority to the role of Eveline in the film version of The Wiz. Her television success did not produce an easy life. King reportedly became frustrated with the direction of What's Happening, particularly the limited development given to the parents. She eventually left the program, surrendering the regular salary and visibility that came with it. Work continued, but serious health problems gradually took control. Diabetes contributed to a stroke and circulatory complications. King underwent amputations, including the loss of a leg and later part of an arm. The physical losses were followed by an emotional one. Her only son died in 1996. Friends and fellow performers later helped organize benefits as medical expenses and declining health created increasing pressure. King died in 1999 at 66. The contrast between her roles and her final years was heartbreaking. On screen, she projected complete authority. Off-screen, illness gradually removed her independence, mobility, family support, and ability to perform. Yet colleagues remembered that she retained humor and dignity. She did not become less talented when work disappeared, or less important when her body failed. King's story is not about a star destroying her own fortune. It is about how quickly medical hardship can overwhelm someone, even after years of recognizable work. Television preserved her voice, but it could not protect the woman behind it. Number 20. Rebecca Schaeffer. Being recognized is usually presented as the reward for becoming an actor. For Rebecca Schaeffer, recognition became dangerous. She played Patty Russell on the CBS sitcom My Sister Sam, portraying a teenager who moves in with her older sister. The program made Schaeffer a familiar face and gave the 21-year-old actress access to larger auditions. One obsessed viewer began following her career. At the time, personal information could be obtained through systems that offered performers little protection. The stalker reportedly used official records and a private investigator to locate Schaeffer's home address. In July 1989, he arrived at her apartment. Schaeffer spoke to him briefly and asked him to leave. He returned later and killed her at her doorway. The loss shocked Hollywood. Schaeffer had not been living recklessly, fighting addiction, or facing financial ruin. Her success had simply made her visible to someone dangerous. Her death helped drive changes in anti-stalking laws and restrictions involving access to personal information. California introduced one of the first anti-stalking laws in the United States, while privacy protections for motor vehicle records were later strengthened nationally. Those reforms came too late for Schaeffer. A young actress who had been preparing for another audition lost her entire future because the entertainment business had taught performers to seek attention without providing enough protection from those who might misuse it. Her story remains one of classic television's darkest warnings. Sometimes, the danger does not begin when fame disappears. Sometimes the danger begins when fame arrives. Number 19. David Strickland. On Suddenly Susan, Todd Stites was sarcastic, mischievous, and full of restless energy. David Strickland's performance made him one of the sitcom's most likable supporting players. The humor concealed a serious struggle. Strickland had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and experienced problems involving substance use. Legal difficulties followed, including an arrest connected to drug possession. The court placed him on probation and required treatment. Friends and colleagues knew that he could move between enthusiasm and deep emotional difficulty. Despite those concerns, his career was advancing. He appeared in films and seemed capable of moving beyond supporting television roles. In March 1999, Strickland traveled to Las Vegas with actor Andy Dick. After several days of partying, he checked into a motel alone. He died by suicide at 29. The producers of Suddenly Susan faced an unusual and painful decision. Rather than pretending Todd had moved away, the series created a tribute episode in which the characters searched for him while recalling earlier moments. The episode eventually allowed the performer's real grief to enter the fictional story. Strickland's death left colleagues questioning whether warning signs had been missed. It also showed how comedy can create a dangerous illusion. A person capable of making an entire room laugh may still feel completely disconnected once that room becomes quiet. He had not yet reached the level of fame that usually produces documentaries and major retrospectives. That makes his story easier to overlook, but not less important. The rising actor lost his life before the public understood he had been struggling at all. Number 18. Phil Hartman. Whenever a comedy program needed reliability, Phil Hartman was the performer-producer's trusted. On Saturday Night Live, he could transform into almost anyone. On news radio, he played the vain but strangely lovable broadcaster Bill McNeil. Colleagues nicknamed him the Glue because he held sketches and casts together. That calm professional image made the circumstances of his death even more shocking. Hartman's marriage to Bryn Omdahl had become troubled. Friends later described tension involving substance use, anger, and insecurity. Hartman often avoided confrontation, retreating rather than allowing arguments to grow. In May 1998, an argument took place at their California home. Later that night, Bryn killed Hartman while he slept. After friends and police arrived, she died by suicide. Their 2 children were left without either parent. The entertainment industry had lost one of its most versatile performers at 49. News radio returned with a tribute that allowed the cast's real grief to shape the episode. John Lovitz later joined the program, but nobody could replace the particular stability Hartman had provided. There was another cruel layer to the tragedy. Hartman had built his career by creating order around unpredictable comedians. He could rescue a weak sketch, calm a nervous performer, and make chaos appear controlled. Yet the conflict inside his own home had reached a point he could not manage. His death also changed how audiences watched his work. Bill McNeil's vanity remained funny, and his animated performances remained brilliant, but every appearance now carried the knowledge that his career had been interrupted at its peak. Hartman did not lose everything through fading popularity. He lost everything in the place where he should have been safest. Number 17. Bob Crane. In front of the camera, Colonel Robert Hogan was always in control. He outsmarted his captors, protected his men, and turned a prisoner of war camp into the setting for clever comedy. Hogan's heroes made Bob Crane one of television's best-known stars. Once the program ended, that control began disappearing. Crane struggled to find another role with the same popularity. He appeared in theater productions and dinner shows, earning a living, but no longer commanding network television. At the same time, details of his private behavior became increasingly risky. Crane used early video equipment to record intimate encounters. His friendship with electronics salesman John Carpenter became connected to that secret world. At the time, the public knew almost nothing about it. In June 1978, while performing in an Arizona theater production, Crane was found killed in his apartment. The case attracted enormous attention, particularly after investigators discovered recordings and photographs revealing his private activities. Carpenter was eventually charged years later but acquitted. The killing remains officially unsolved. Crane lost more than his life. The public image built through years of family-friendly television was replaced by discussions of obsession, secrecy, and an unresolved crime. That does not mean his private behavior proves who killed him. It does explain why the investigation became so complicated and why his reputation changed after his death. The smiling hero of Hogan's heroes had spent years carefully separating his television identity from his private life. When he died, that wall collapsed completely. His comedy remained in syndication, but the mystery surrounding his final night became more famous than almost everything he did after the show. Number 16. Freddie Prinze. Almost nobody rises as quickly as Freddie Prinze did. As a teenager, he performed comedy in New York clubs. Soon he appeared on The Tonight Show, impressed Johnny Carson, and became the star of Chico and the Man. The phrase "looking good" spread across America. Behind that explosive success was a young man struggling to manage pressure, depression, substance use, and a collapsing marriage. Network schedules, live performances, interviews, and public expectations left little space for an ordinary life. Prinze was earning enormous money, but emotional stability did not follow. Friends described changes in his behavior. His reliance on medication and other substances increased, while his relationship with his wife deteriorated. In January 1977, during a deeply troubled period, Prinze suffered a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He died the following day at 22. His death was initially ruled a suicide. Years later, his mother pursued a civil case arguing that medication had impaired his judgment, and a jury finding affected how the death was treated for insurance purposes. The legal distinction could not change the central tragedy. An extraordinarily successful young performer had reached a fatal crisis before most people his age had even begun their careers. Chico and the Man attempted to continue, but the program had lost its center. Audiences were no longer watching a simple comedy about generational conflict. Every empty space reminded them that Prinze was gone. His story became one of Hollywood's earliest modern warnings about instant celebrity. Fame had arrived before he possessed the support, experience, or emotional tools required to survive it. Prinze appeared to have everything: money, talent, recognition, and a hit program. Yet at the moment the world believed he was winning, he felt unable to continue. Brian Keith. On Family Affair, Bill Davis suddenly becomes responsible for 3 children and slowly transforms from an independent bachelor into a devoted father. Brian Keith gave the character strength without making him cold. That comforting television image stood in painful contrast to his final months. Keith had enjoyed a long career in film and television, but by the 1990s his health was deteriorating. He experienced emphysema and was diagnosed with lung cancer. Physical discomfort and the loss of independence reportedly weighed heavily on him. Then came a devastating family tragedy. In April 1997, his daughter Daisy died by suicide. She was 27. Keith was already seriously ill, and those close to him said her death deeply affected him. 10 weeks later, Keith died by suicide at his California home. He was 75. The ending created an unavoidable connection in the public mind. between the actor and the father figure he had played. Millions remembered him as the dependable man who held a fictional household together. In real life, illness and grief had overwhelmed him. Keith's death also demonstrated that long careers do not necessarily create peaceful endings. He had worked for decades, earned admiration, and remained active far longer than many of his contemporaries. Yet professional achievement could not remove physical suffering or the shock of losing a child. Discussions of his death should never reduce it to one simple cause. Serious illness, depression, grief, age, and private circumstances can combine in ways outsiders cannot fully understand. What remains is the tragic reversal of family affair. Television gave Keith a household that could survive every 30-minute crisis. Real life gave him a loss that could not be resolved before the closing credits. Number 14. Carroll O'Connor. Every week, Archie Bunker entered arguments believing he knew the answer to everything. Carroll O'Connor made the character loud, stubborn, offensive, and unexpectedly human. All in the Family transformed him into a television legend. Away from the set, O'Connor faced a problem that fame could not solve. His adopted son, Hugh, struggled for years with substance use. The family tried treatment, supervision, support, and confrontation. O'Connor later described the helplessness of watching someone he loved repeatedly return to destructive behavior. In March 1995, Hugh died by suicide at 32. The grief changed O'Connor's public life. Instead of hiding the circumstances, he spoke openly about addiction and named the man he believed had supplied drugs to his son. That accusation led to a legal battle, but O'Connor refused to remain silent. He became an advocate for laws allowing families to pursue civil action against drug suppliers. California eventually enacted legislation associated with his campaign. The actor continued working, including on In the Heat of the Night, but colleagues said the loss remained with him. He carried a small photograph of Hugh and spoke about him in interviews. O'Connor's story differs from many others in this countdown. He did not lose his fortune or destroy his career. He lost the person he had spent years trying to protect. That loss revealed a side of him very different from Archie Bunker. The television character responded to fear by shouting. O'Connor responded to grief by becoming an activist. Nothing could bring his son back, but he attempted to turn private devastation into protection for other families. The comedy star had won major awards and achieved a level of television immortality few actors ever reach. Yet when he discussed Hugh, those achievements seemed unimportant. The one battle he wanted most desperately to win was the one that fame could not influence. Number 13. Bill Bixby. Viewers often remember Bill Bixby as calm, thoughtful, and reassuring. Whether he was dealing with an alien uncle in My Favorite Martian, raising a child in The Courtship of Eddie's Father, or controlling hidden rage in The Incredible Hulk, he brought emotional intelligence to unusual stories. His private life became far more painful than anything written for television. Bixby married actress Brenda Benet in 1971, and their son Christopher was born several years later. The marriage ended, but both parents remained connected through the child. In 1981, 6-year-old Christopher died suddenly from a rare throat infection during a medical procedure. The loss devastated both parents. Less than a year later, Benet died by suicide. Bixby continued working, but friends said those events changed him. He threw himself into acting and directing, perhaps because work provided structure when private life no longer did. Another crisis arrived in the early 1990s, when doctors diagnosed him with prostate cancer. Bixby underwent treatment while continuing to direct the sitcom Blossom. Even as his condition worsened, he remained involved in production. He married artist Judith Kleben shortly before his death in November 1993. He was 59. Bixby's story feels especially cruel, because television repeatedly cast him as a man who could manage extraordinary circumstances. David Banner searched for a cure. Tom Corbett found ways to guide his son. Tim O'Hara protected his unusual family secret. Real life provided no comparable solution. He lost his child, his former wife, his health, and finally his future. Yet he continued working with professionalism, rarely allowing audiences to see the weight he carried. Behind one of classic television's most gentle faces was a man who had survived repeated grief and still arrived on set, ready to help other performers tell their stories. Number 12. Mackenzie Phillips. From the outside, Julie Cooper seemed like another rebellious television teenager. On One Day at a Time, she argued with her mother, made impulsive choices, and tested every boundary inside the apartment. For Mackenzie Phillips, rebellion was not limited to the script. She had grown up around fame and drugs. Her father, musician John Phillips, belonged to one of the most successful groups of the 1960s. That environment exposed her to substance use at an extremely young age. Success arrived while she was still a teenager, but dependency grew beside it. On the set of One Day at a Time, lateness, exhaustion, and difficulty remembering lines became increasingly serious. Producers attempted to manage the situation, but eventually Phillips was fired. She later returned after treatment, offering what seemed like a second chance. The improvement did not last. When producers demanded another drug test, conflict followed, and she was removed again. The dismissal meant more than losing a salary. The cast had functioned as a second family, particularly during years when her personal relationships were unstable. Being expelled from the program reinforced the shame and isolation already feeding her addiction. Arrests and years of treatment followed. Phillips spent large amounts of money supporting substance use, damaged professional relationships, and lost opportunities that might have turned early success into a secure adult career. Recovery did not happen through one dramatic television moment. It developed gradually through repeated attempts, accountability, counseling, and work helping others. Phillips eventually became a substance use counselor and returned to acting in selected projects. She also spoke publicly about deeply disturbing experiences inside her family, creating controversy but refusing to remain silent. Her story is not a simple decline ending in defeat. She lost a hit program, money, trust, and years of her life. Then she built a new identity from the experiences that had nearly destroyed her. Julie Cooper never truly disappeared. The difference was that Phillips eventually learned to confront the chaos without needing a scriptwriter to resolve it before the episode ended. Number 11. Danny Bonaduce. Inside the Partridge Family. Danny Partridge had everything a child might imagine. A famous musical family, television adventures, and a brightly painted bus carrying everyone toward another performance. When the series ended, Danny Bonaduce discovered that the television family had never been real. His relationship with his father was troubled, and the structure provided by weekly production disappeared. Bonaduce entered adolescence with money, recognition, anger, and little understanding of ordinary life. Acting offers declined. Substance use and legal problems followed. At one point, Bonaduce described living in his car while still being recognized by strangers. He would sign autographs and then wait for them to leave before climbing back inside the vehicle where he slept. The contrast was almost unbelievable. Television continued showing him inside the comfortable Partridge home, while the real performer struggled to find a safe place for the night. Bonaduce was arrested during periods of instability and became known as an example of the damaged child star. Yet he repeatedly found ways to re-enter public life. Radio eventually gave him a second career. His aggressive honesty, quick humor, and willingness to discuss his failures made him a successful presenter. Reality television followed, sometimes offering uncomfortable access to his relationships and addiction struggles. Health problems later created another challenge. Bonaduce experienced difficulty walking and speaking before being diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a condition involving fluid pressure in the brain. Surgery improved some symptoms, although he eventually retired from his long-running radio program in 2023. His journey contains nearly every stage associated with child star collapse: early fame, family instability, substance use, homelessness, arrests, public humiliation, reinvention, and health problems. But unlike many performers on this list, Bonaduce survived long enough to understand the pattern. He lost the protected childhood television appeared to give him. He then spent decades constructing an adult life from the wreckage. Number 10. Dick York. Every magical disaster on Bewitched disappeared with a movement of Samantha's nose. The real pain Dick York carried onto the set could not be removed so easily. Years before playing Darren Stevens, York suffered a severe back injury while making the film They Came to Cordura. During a physically demanding scene, equipment pulled unexpectedly, damaging muscles along his back. The injury developed into chronic pain. York continued acting because supporting his family depended on it, but long production days became increasingly difficult. Doctors prescribed powerful pain medication, and dependency followed. On Bewitched, crew members sometimes constructed special supports so he could lean between scenes. York performed comedy while experiencing pain intense enough to cause nausea and exhaustion. In 1969, while filming an episode, he suffered a seizure and collapsed. From his hospital bed, York told producers he could not continue. The program replaced him with Dick Sargent, without explaining the change inside the story. Leaving the series damaged York's career and finances. Casting directors were reluctant to hire an actor with serious health problems. As work disappeared, money became scarce. He and his family reportedly relied on unemployment support and cleaning jobs before eventually stabilizing. Emphysema later restricted his breathing, but York still tried to help others. He established an organization intended to support homeless people and encourage donations, despite his own limited circumstances. The cruelty of his story lies in the character he played. Darren spent every week surrounded by impossible magic, yet York was experiencing a physical reality nobody could reverse. He did not leave because of an argument or demand a larger salary. His body simply reached a point where pretending not to hurt was no longer possible. Television replaced Darren and continued. York lost the role. His earning power, his mobility, and much of the future his success should have secured. Number 9. Erin Moran. Every entrance into Arnold's Drive-In seemed to promise another harmless adventure. Erin Moran joined Happy Days as Joni Cunningham when she was still a child, growing up in front of an enormous television audience. Joni became popular enough to receive a spin-off, Joni Loves Chachi. When that program failed, Moran returned briefly to Happy Days, but the security of regular television employment was disappearing. Adult roles proved difficult to obtain. Casting directors continued seeing the little sister from the Cunningham household rather than a performer capable of changing with age. Financial trouble followed. Moran later joined other Happy Days cast members in a lawsuit concerning merchandise royalties. The dispute resulted in a settlement, but it did not create permanent security. Her California home reportedly entered foreclosure in 2010. Moran and her husband moved to Indiana, where they stayed in a trailer belonging to his mother. Tabloid reports portrayed the situation harshly, often turning financial hardship into entertainment. Public appearances became less frequent. Reports about alcohol and unusual behavior circulated, although many were based on anonymous claims and should be treated carefully. When Moran died in April 2017, at 56, initial speculation spread quickly. Authorities later determined that she had advanced throat cancer. No illegal substances were found in her system. That finding exposed how completely the damaged child star story had taken control of her reputation. Many people had assumed the worst before medical facts were available. Moran had lost her television career, home, financial security, privacy, and eventually her health. Yet co-stars remembered someone far more complicated than the headlines suggested. The saddest part may be that Happy Days never stopped playing. The Cunningham house remained warm and secure in reruns, while the actress who grew up inside it struggled to find either stability or a place where the public would allow her to become an ordinary adult. Number 8. Todd Bridges. Trouble did not begin after different strokes. Todd Bridges has described experiencing abuse and instability before and during his rise to fame. Television success placed money and attention around him, but it did not repair the damage. As Willis Jackson, Bridges became one of the most recognizable young actors in America. The program addressed racism, class, adoption, and serious social issues. Yet the young cast received little protection from the pressures developing outside the studio. After the series ended, Bridges struggled with substance use. Acting work became less dependable, while arrests and frightening headlines became more common. In 1989, he was charged with attempted murder following the shooting of a drug dealer. Bridges said he had not committed the shooting, and a jury acquitted him. Even with that verdict, the case reinforced the public belief that another child star had been permanently destroyed. For years, his name appeared more often in crime reports than entertainment stories. Money disappeared, trust weakened, and many producers considered him unemployable. The ending was different from what many expected. Bridges entered recovery, and has said he has remained sober since the early 1990s. He returned to television, wrote about his experiences, raised a family, and began speaking honestly about childhood trauma. Recovery did not erase the people hurt during his addicted years, and Bridges has not pretended that it did. His achievement was learning to accept responsibility without allowing shame to become another reason to relapse. That distinction matters. Some former child performers are treated as though early mistakes prove they were always destined to fail. Bridges survived long enough to challenge that belief. He had lost career momentum, money, public respect, freedom, and nearly his life. Yet the final chapter became reconstruction rather than collapse. Willis Jackson was once written as the sensible older brother. Decades later, Bridges became something more valuable. Evidence that even a person Hollywood has completely written off may still rewrite himself. Number 7. Willie Ames. At one point, Willie Ames was earning more money in a year than most people would see in a lifetime. He had starred as Tommy Bradford on 8 is Enough, and later joined Scott Baio in the popular sitcom Charles in Charge. The income created an illusion of permanence, Amis adopted an expensive lifestyle and assumed television opportunities would continue. When steady acting work disappeared, his spending did not immediately adjust. Poor financial decisions, failed investments, and personal difficulties drained his resources. He filed for bankruptcy. His home entered foreclosure. During the lowest period, Amis said he became effectively homeless, sleeping in garages, parks, and occasionally beneath bushes. Sometimes friends allowed him to stay temporarily, but there was no stable home waiting after the cameras stopped. The fall was so dramatic that even Amis struggled to understand it. A performer who had once earned approximately $1 million annually was applying for ordinary jobs and attempting to rebuild from almost nothing. Substance use and damaged relationships had also contributed to the collapse. He experienced multiple marriages, professional disappointments, and periods when the entertainment industry seemed uninterested in him. Yet Amis did not remain trapped in that chapter. He entered recovery, accepted work away from Hollywood, and became a cruise director. The position required discipline, hospitality, and the ability to interact with passengers who sometimes recognized him from television. Rather than treating the job as humiliation, he described it as part of rebuilding dignity. Acting opportunities later returned, including family-oriented productions and appearances that allowed him to discuss his journey. Ames's story may be one of the most literal examples of losing everything. The money vanished. The house disappeared. The career stalled. At times, even a safe bed was uncertain. What saved him was not another million-dollar contract. It was a willingness to accept ordinary work and recognize that survival mattered more than maintaining the appearance of celebrity. Hollywood had taught him how to look successful. Losing everything forced him to learn how to live without the costume. Number 6. David Cassidy. The screaming became so loud that David Cassidy sometimes could not hear his own band. As Keith Partridge, he was the perfect television teenager, talented, handsome, polite, and surrounded by a loving musical family. Real fame felt nothing like the program. Cassidy became one of the biggest teen idols of the early 1970s. Stadiums filled with fans, merchandise covered bedroom walls, and the production schedule left him physically exhausted. He wanted recognition as a serious musician, but executives continued selling the safe television image. A concert tragedy in London, where a young fan died after being injured in a crowd surge, affected him deeply. Cassidy later reduced touring, but he never fully escaped the emotional and financial pressures surrounding fame. His career continued through music, theater, and television, yet the extraordinary early success was impossible to repeat. Alcohol increasingly became a problem. Multiple arrests for driving under the influence damaged his reputation. His marriage ended, properties were sold, and financial obligations grew. In 2015, Cassidy filed for bankruptcy protection. During a performance in 2017, he struggled to remember lyrics and appeared unsteady. Many assumed alcohol was entirely responsible. Cassidy later announced that he was experiencing dementia, although people close to him subsequently said alcohol-related illness had also played a central role. He died in November 2017 from organ failure at 67. Cassidy's final years were filled with contradictions. He still had fans, famous songs, and a name capable of attracting audiences. At the same time, he was dealing with debt, addiction, damaged relationships, and worsening health. The fictional Partridge family traveled from town to town without facing real consequences. Cassidy traveled the world and carried every consequence with him. He had received the kind of adoration young performers dream about. What he lost was the ability to experience it as love rather than pressure. By the end, the applause that once seemed endless could not restore his money, health, family relationships, or control over the image created when he was barely old enough to understand it. Number 5. Anissa Jones. Every episode presented Buffy as safe, protected, and surrounded by adults who cared about her. Anissa Jones's reality was far less secure. She was only 8 when she began playing Buffy Davis on Family Affair. The character carried a doll named Mrs. Beasley and became one of television's most recognizable children. Filming dominated Jones's childhood. When the program ended in 1971, she wanted little to do with acting. Producers reportedly considered her for other roles, but Jones resisted being pushed back into the industry. Ordinary adolescence proved difficult. Her parents had separated, and family disputes over custody and money created instability. Her father died while she was young, and her relationship with her mother became troubled. At 18, Jones gained control of money held from her television earnings. The amount offered freedom, but freedom arrived without the structure or guidance she needed. In August 1976, after attending a gathering with friends, Jones died from an accidental combination of drugs. She was 18 years old. The speed of the decline shocked the public. Only 5 years had passed since viewers watched Buffy inside the comfortable Davis apartment. Her death also exposed the limitations of protections designed for child performers. Saving part of a child's salary does not teach that child how to manage sudden independence. Fame can delay ordinary development while placing adult resources within reach, the moment legal childhood ends. Jones had lost interest in acting, but television never lost interest in Buffy. Reruns preserved the little girl with pigtails long after the actress wanted to become someone else. That frozen image became part of the tragedy. Audiences continued seeing innocence, while Jones was confronting family conflict, public recognition, money, and adulthood without a stable foundation. She did not lose a long adult career because she never received the opportunity to build one. Everything ended before her 19th birthday. The house on Family Affair promised that Uncle Bill and Mr. French could solve any problem. Anissa Jones discovered that outside the studio, no responsible adult was always waiting in the next room. Number 4. Brett Butler. Few collapses in television history were as fast or as complete. Brett Butler went from waiting tables and performing stand-up comedy to starring in one of America's highest-rated programs. Grace Under Fire was built around her personality. Butler played Grace Kelly, a recovering alcoholic raising children after leaving a troubled marriage. The comedy was sharp because Butler understood working-class hardship and addiction from experience. Success brought money, awards, influence, and pressure. It also provided access to prescription medication. After being prescribed painkillers, Butler developed a dependency. Her behavior on set became increasingly difficult. Production delays, absences, and conflicts affected the cast and crew. Several performers left the program, and reports suggested that working conditions had become unstable. In 1998, despite strong ratings, ABC canceled Grace Under Fire. Butler had lost the program carrying her name. The financial decline followed. Money that should have created lifelong security disappeared through spending, poor management, taxes, and the disruption of addiction. Butler entered treatment and said she became sober. Mainstream Hollywood did not immediately welcome her back. She moved to a farm in Georgia, hoping to create a quieter life. When that arrangement failed financially, she lost the property. Butler later revealed that she had stayed in homeless shelters and depended on assistance. The contrast was stunning. A woman who had reportedly earned millions from a network hit was struggling to pay basic expenses. Small acting roles eventually returned, including appearances on The Walking Dead and The Morning Show. Yet during the pandemic, work disappeared again. Friends organized an online fundraiser after learning how severe her financial situation had become. Butler spoke openly, rather than pretending the collapse had never happened. She acknowledged her responsibility for behavior during addiction, while also explaining how quickly illness and financial mistakes can destroy a fortune. Her story represents nearly every meaning of lost everything. She lost a hit series, professional trust, wealth, property, and housing. At one stage, she believed she might have lost the ability to perform as well. What remained was her voice. The same honesty that once made Grace Under Fire successful eventually allowed Butler to discuss addiction, poverty, and the humiliating distance between being famous and being secure. Television had made her look invincible. Survival required admitting that she was not. Number 3. Red Fox. On Sanford & Son, Fred Sanford constantly warned that one more shock might bring on the big one. The joke became legendary because Red Fox delivered it with complete commitment. Behind the comedy, his finances were moving toward a real emergency. Fox had spent decades performing in clubs before television made him a household name. His salary increased dramatically, and he fought producers for better treatment and compensation. At the height of his fame, he appeared to have finally achieved security. But Fox lived extravagantly. He spent money on homes, cars, jewelry, gifts, and an enormous social circle. Multiple marriages and expensive divorces added further pressure. Tax problems became severe. In 1983, Fox filed for bankruptcy. The filing did not resolve everything. In 1989, federal tax agents arrived at his Las Vegas property. They seized vehicles, jewelry, furniture, and other possessions, while attempting to collect millions in unpaid taxes. Reports described Fox being left with little more than basic clothing and personal items. The scene felt like something from a dark television parody. A comedian who had made audiences laugh about poverty and junk dealing watched officials place labels on the belongings purchased during his years of success. Fox continued working because retirement was no longer financially possible. He accepted performances, television appearances, and another sitcom, The Royal Family, alongside Della Reese. During rehearsal in October 1991, Fox collapsed on the set. At first, some cast members reportedly assumed he was performing his famous heart attack routine. This time, it was real. Fox died at 68. Even after decades of success, his estate faced financial complications. Fox's fall was not caused by one failed program. It developed through years of spending, tax obligations, legal costs, and the belief that another payment would always arrive. His experience also reflected the insecurity faced by performers who achieve wealth after growing up without it. Earning money and preserving money require different skills. Hollywood rewards the first, while rarely teaching the second. Fred Sanford lived inside a cluttered house filled with objects he hoped to sell. Red Fox lived among expensive possessions that the government eventually carried away. The laughter remained. The fortune did not. Number 2. Dana Plato. Inside the Drummond penthouse, Kimberly was the child who appeared least likely to face disaster. She was intelligent, wealthy, responsible, and protected by a loving television father. Dana Plato's life moved in the opposite direction. She began acting in commercials as a child and joined Different Strokes at 14. The program became a major hit, but Plato was growing up inside an environment filled with adult pressure and easy access to substances. When she became pregnant, producers reduced her role and eventually removed her from the regular cast. The decision ended the most dependable income and structure in her life. Finding adult roles proved extremely difficult. Viewers still saw Kimberly, while casting directors appeared uncertain what else Plato could play. Financial problems grew, and a former accountant was accused of mishandling much of her money. Substance use became increasingly serious. Plato appeared in lower-budget films and adult-oriented projects in an attempt to continue earning. Each choice moved her further from the wholesome image that had made her famous. In 1991, she entered a video store in Las Vegas and demanded money while carrying a pellet gun. The robbery produced only a small amount of cash and led to immediate arrest. Entertainer Wayne Newton paid her bail and attempted to help. The following year, Plato was arrested for forging prescriptions. She received probation and entered rehabilitation, but stability remained difficult. By the end of the decade, her career had almost disappeared. She lived in a recreational vehicle with her fiancé and traveled for limited work. In May 1999, Plato appeared on Howard Stern's radio program. Callers questioned her sobriety and mocked her difficulties. Plato insisted that she was doing well and challenged critics to test her hair for evidence of drug use. The next day, while visiting her fiancé's family in Oklahoma, she died from an overdose of prescription medication. Authorities ruled the death a suicide. She was 34. Her son Tyler was only 14. 11 years later, he also died by suicide. Plato's journey became the darkest chapter associated with Different Strokes. She lost the program, her savings, acting opportunities, legal freedom, public dignity, stable housing, and eventually her life. What makes the story more disturbing is how often her pain became entertainment. Arrest photographs, interviews, and humiliating appearances were consumed by an audience that remembered Kimberly, but offered little compassion to Dana. Television had presented her as the fortunate child adopted into wealth. Reality left her struggling for small amounts of money in a video store. The distance between those two images may be one of the cruelest contrasts in classic sitcom history. Number 1. Gary Coleman. Nobody on classic television appeared more powerful than Arnold Jackson. Gary Coleman was small, sharp, confident, and capable of controlling an entire episode with one confused question. Behind the catchphrase was a child carrying adult responsibilities. Coleman had been born with serious kidney disease. Medical treatment affected his growth, giving him the appearance that eventually made him distinctive to casting directors. He underwent multiple transplant procedures and required lifelong care. When Different Strokes became successful, Coleman emerged as its biggest star. At his peak, he was reportedly one of the highest-paid child actors on television. His face appeared on merchandise, magazines, and advertisements across America. The money should have protected him forever. When Coleman reached adulthood, he discovered that much of his fortune was gone. He accused his parents and former business advisor of mishandling earnings and filed a lawsuit. A court eventually awarded him approximately $1.28 million, but legal victories could not restore the full amount he believed had been lost. Adult acting opportunities were limited. Coleman's height, voice, and permanent association with Arnold made it difficult for audiences to accept him in different roles. Producers wanted the catchphrase more than the actor. Financial problems continued. In 1999, Coleman filed for bankruptcy, reportedly blaming medical expenses, poor investments, agents, lawyers, and family disputes. The former television millionaire accepted jobs that surprised the public, including working as a security guard. Instead of respecting the effort, newspapers often treated his ordinary employment as a joke. Legal and personal incidents created more damaging headlines. Coleman faced charges following confrontations with fans and photographers. A complicated marriage to Shannon Price attracted reality television attention and reports of domestic conflict. The public responded to nearly every difficulty with the same cruel amusement. Because Coleman had been funny as a child, many people seemed unable to recognize his anger as the frustration of an adult who believed his childhood had been taken from him. His health remained fragile. Years of kidney treatment, dialysis, heart surgery, and medication placed enormous stress on his body. In May 2010, Coleman fell at his Utah home and suffered a serious head injury. He was hospitalized and later placed on life support. He died at 42. Disputes over his estate and final wishes followed almost immediately. Former partners and associates argued over legal authority, while reports indicated that the estate possessed very limited value. That was the final contradiction. One of the most profitable child stars in television history died with a complicated personal life, damaged health, limited money, and no dependable family structure surrounding him. Coleman had lost his fortune, career freedom, privacy, physical independence, and trust in many of the adults who had managed his success. Even his childhood identity no longer belonged entirely to him. Arnold Jackson had become a piece of television property, repeated endlessly in clips and jokes. Yet reducing Coleman to a warning about child stardom would be unfair. He was also intelligent, politically interested, private, and determined to work despite constant medical difficulty. The industry had rewarded him for remaining visually young. Then it punished him for being unable to grow beyond the image it had sold. Millions can still watch Arnold enter a beautiful apartment and discover a new family willing to give him everything. Gary Coleman's real ending was the reverse. The world gave him extraordinary fame before he was old enough to control it. And by adulthood, almost everything connected to that success had been taken away. These stories do not prove that fame always destroys people. They prove that fame cannot protect anyone from bad choices, unfair contracts, illness, grief, addiction, exploitation, or betrayal. Some stars rebuilt their lives. Others never received the chance. The lesson is not simply to judge them from a distance, but to remember the human being behind each famous character. Which story surprised you most? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more hidden history from classic television.